Hello! Now, what's this all about? Well, I do a training course for a local IT company where I'm one of the trainers for them, and I train up their staff with a sort of a fast track course before they all go out and become engineers and start their career in IT. And part of that training course is to do a history of Windows. And we look at Windows 1 and then, just briefly. What I'm talking about that, I mention other stuff that was on at the time, but especially the Sinclair ZX81, which I had when I was about sort of 12, 13. And for the first week ever, and that's what prompted this video, for the first week ever, everyone in the class just sort of stared at me blankly and had no idea what I was talking about. So that's why I'm doing this video. It's not as an exhaustive guide to the Sinclair ZX81, because you can use a thing called the internet to find out in great detail about what's going on. But it's more a sort of an introduction, and just to highlight a few of the things that, if you are looking to buy one, then the sort of kind of thing that I wish I knew before I started buying them again. I had one when I was 13, as I mentioned. It sold it years ago. I think it was to fund the next thing, which is probably the Spectrum, but more on that in another video. So I've got a few here to show you, and I'm going to sort of discuss some of the issues and what to look out for if you're looking to buy them, and just give you a sort of a feel for what this technology was. So yeah, if you're interested in that, then obviously stay tuned, and yeah, here we go. So the first bit of the video really is just a bit of context. So in the 70s, Sinclair are producing things like that, the Oxford 200 calculator, which I just happen to have one of here, with its instruction book. It's quite a nice little book, but it was notoriously battery draining, so they made a mains adapter for it, and this is the original mains adapter. So we'll just plug that in, and we'll plug it into the back of the calculator. It's got a little hole in the back, and then we'll power it up, and then you can probably just see that it works. So they did quite a lot of those. They did the Oxford series and the Cambridge series. They also made little tellies and radios and hi-fi equipment. So Sinclair were actually manufacturing quite a lot of sort of consumer electronics at that time. But it really took off for them when they made the Sinclair ZX80. Now, I haven't got one of those. They made about 100,000, released in 1980, and then just over a year later they released the ZX81. So historically, it's going to be quite difficult to get hold of a Sinclair ZX80 that's in mint condition, original, because they didn't make that many of them, and the ones they did made were upgraded pretty quickly when the 81 came out. So you might get a lot of them that are sort of cannibalized and hacked and tweaked, and the ROM swapped out and things like that. So if you've got a ZX80 in the loft, yeah, that's a bit of a gold mine. So realistically, we're just looking at the ZX81 now, and that was obviously released in 1981. So at the time you couldn't really get anything in the home, so they released this What Would I Do With a Computer, which just makes me laugh every time I read it. You'd be surprised how much you can do with a personal computer, and even more surprised at how little it costs. Someone's modified this one. They've changed the price to £49.99, because originally when it came out it was £70. So I've got some other adverts lurking here, original adverts for it. So there's this one here. What's hilarious about this is that it came from a magazine called Everyday Electronics, except there you go. So it's £70 built, £49.99 as a kit, and this is page 421 from Everyday Electronics in June 1982. Can you imagine a magazine that's got 420 pages these days? It's just not happening, is it? So that's an original advert that you'd obviously cut out and order with. There's also got a software catalogue and that kind of thing. So sometimes you get little leaflets with them, sometimes you wouldn't. But the first editions were kind of interesting because they would come with a basic programming manual. This is a first edition manual, 1980. They would also come with like a cassette lead, more on that in a bit. They come with a power supply. Now the one I've got here, this actually is a ZX80 power supply, as you can see. This was actually supplied with an 81. Actually, this ZX81 here, and this is it's an issue 1 board, first edition board. There's some information on the screen now about the internals of it. It also came with this RAM pack here. This is an issue 1 RAM pack. Again, there's a picture of the internals of that on the screen. I think they made about 3 different versions of the RAM pack. You can't tell what it is until you open it up and look, but generally speaking, if it's got a blue connector, then that's an issue 1. So this has got the blue connector with the white bit in there. And if we also look at the screws, because they sort of put in the screws they had lying around. So these 2 screws here are quite long screws, but they're not, I don't know how well you can see that, but they're not actually flush with it. They sort of stick out a little bit. And there's sort of silver screws on the back, which are sort of small screws. So the screws varied. You can tell a little bit which one it is by looking at the edge connector and the screws, but the only way to really find out what version it is to open it up and have a look at the circuit board. Similarly with the 81, you can look at the back of it, but there's no indication on there, there's no serial numbers or anything. This is before they put serial numbers on things. So the only way to actually find out what you've got is to open it up and have a look. Now what's interesting about that is there were different versions of the ROM. And this one here contains the first version of the ROM, which you could also put into a ZX80 to make it into an 81. So that's why there aren't many ZX80s in their original form left, because people upgraded them as quickly as possible, rip the ROM out and put the new one in. So this has got the original ROM in it, and it's actually faulty. If you try and do, I think it's the square root of a quarter, it should be a half, but it actually makes it into a different number. So they swapped that out for another ROM, which also had a few issues. That's meant to be the rarer one. And then they did the final version. So there's three main versions of the ROM in these things. Right, so those are the machines, and you get a power supply. This one obviously was supplied with the ZX80, so they had stock left over. They both use the same 9 volt with the same connector on it. So this particular one here is an issue 1, but it's like an original issue 1 because it came with things like the dodgy power supply, and it came with the actual RAM pack is also an issue 1 as well. And those are the audio cables. When you bought them, if you bought the first ones, they would come in a brown box because they were mail order. Slightly later ones came in sort of a retail box like this, and that's the RAM pack retail box. You can say it's $49.95 from W.H. Smith's. We'll look at the RAM pack first. Generally speaking, these haven't survived that well. This one's actually quite a good one, because obviously it's just a cardboard slip cover, so they tended to get thrown away. Some people, depending on age, would shove them in the loft. There's also an instruction book with them, which is a little fold-out piece of paper like this, which I'll just show you this one. Essentially, it gave a memory test program so you could work out, so you could test it was working, and it would have a bit of description about what it is. A little mental arithmetic should show that the computer can theoretically handle up to 960 program lines when fitted with the expansion pack. Oh, a little mental arithmetic. Ah, right. For context, the first versions of a ZX81 were available as a kit as well, and you'd solder it yourself. I mean, wow, imagine that now. Not happening, is it? When I was 13, I wasn't allowed a soldering iron, so I got one that was pre-made. So this is, I think this is an issue 1 as well, because you can tell by the look at the screws stick out, and you've got the blue connector. So that's quite a nice one in its original box. I've got another one that isn't quite so well looked after. That's this one here, and we'll have a very quick look at that while we're at it. So this is clearly different. You can see it's got a black edge connector and the screws are more flush. They're also Posidrive screws. If you look very closely, you can see it's got the Posidrive markings on it. And the ones on the back just aren't flush, they stick out. They've got a bit of a reputation for sort of putting things in that hadn't to be lying around. So they obviously had a whole factory full of stuff. They just assembled things with whatever was to hand. So that's a different version. What I'll do is, for completeness, I don't want to get those instruction manuals mixed up. What I'll do is I'll open this one up and we'll have a look. So you can't, again, they are sort of screwed in. As long as you don't over tighten the screws, you won't do any damage to it. So that's a hell of a long screw on that. So I'm just going to undo this one as well. So what you might find is when you're looking at things for sale, they will take the cover apart and they will should probably have unplugged the phone, but there we go. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, taking the screws out. So these are really quite long screws and they're Posidrive ones. The ones at the back, not so much. When you're taking them apart, as we'll see when we do an 81, you'll see that there's quite a lot of different screws in, which obviously increase costs. So they were sort of engineered rather than anything else. So this is an issue 3. As you can see, it says issue 3 on it. So it's got the black and it's got the Posidrive screws. So that's a much later version of it. I'm going to put that back together again. The issue 1s are, there's a lot more going on in terms of inside, but when you're looking at listings, you'll probably see the version number because they would have done what I did just then, and they go back together. They're not glued, they're just sort of screwed together, so you can sort of take them apart and put them back together again. What you shouldn't do is over tighten the screws, because if you tighten the screws, it will destroy the internal plastic, because it is 40 years old, remember. So when you're screwing it in, just screw it in very slowly, and when you get a bit of resistance, just sort of stop, and then it'll be fine. So that's it reassembled. I'll put that back in there. Now it's an issue 3, I'm going to check the bit of paper. You can see the bit of paper is exactly the same as the other one. So they changed the version of the RAM pack, but they didn't change the instructions. So we put that back in its little box, and that's it tucked away nicely. Now let's look at the actual ZX81 itself. So they come in a box like this. It's a slip cover. There were different versions of the box. Some had panels on the end. Some didn't have printed boxes at all because they were mail order. They came in brown boxes. They tend not to have the boxes, so they were the first early versions. Like the one I've got here is a first version, but it doesn't have the box or the polystyrene at all, because that would tend to get chucked away. So, and when you opened it up, you would see inside an aerial lead, RF. Come to that in a bit. The actual ZX81 itself. And then you get a cassette lead and a power lead. What's cool about the power lead is it's really long. I mean, it's just miles and miles of cable, because in the 80s you didn't have as many sockets in the house. So you had to get the power to the thing. And this one comes with a software catalogue, which has got the cassette things, the hardware options, 8K basic ROM. So cassette 1 games, more on those in a bit. So this is like a sort of first catalogue, and this one isn't dated. There's no date written on this. There are other ones that you can get, but this actual basic programming manual, this is first edition 1980, second edition 81, reprinted 82. So that sort of dates it as well. And what we can do with this one is we can take a look inside if you want. So here it is here. Now on the back there are several screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. So in order to get at it, you've got to take these little feet off don't worry, because when you put them back on, you can put them back on using double-sided tape. So I'm just going to peel those off like that. That one didn't come off cleanly, but again it doesn't matter because you can just use double-sided tape. That one didn't come off cleanly as well. So I'll get my tweezers and we'll just tease off that. There's a very good chance that if you get a ZX81 it would have been opened up anyway. Notice there isn't one underneath that, so that one didn't need to come off. But don't worry, I'm going to put it back on anyway. So we'll just peel this off here. It's not the original one, it must have been taken apart at some stage in the past. So we'll just rearrange those feet, get those back out of the way. So I'm going to re-stick those when I reassemble it. Get my screwdriver again. So there's one screw here, which I'm just going to undo. So the purpose of this video is not to be sort of exhaustive about all aspects of these things, because if you want to find out about the specification, and just search on the internet, you'll find loads of information. There's quite a thriving community. So those three screws are all the same, but the ones at the front are shorter, which is, and they could have just used the same screws in all of them, wouldn't they? And that would have reduced manufacturing costs, but they didn't. So those are little tiny ones at the front. Again, I'm just unscrewing it. I'm not trying to be comprehensive, so before you start commenting, I just want to give you a rough idea. So we're inside, and this is an issue 1 board, 1980 issue 1. So I'm just going to undo 2 more screws, 1 screw there and 1 screw there. So we'll take those off. Now they are the same as those, but I don't want to get them mixed up, just because, you know, we don't need to, so let's not. And we'll be really careful how I flip it over, because there's a ribbon cable which the keyboard uses, like that. And there we are. So doesn't appear to be very much in there, does there? But what's interesting is the main ULA there, because if you look, it's got a number on it, 8144, and that means it was manufactured and put in on 1981 on the 44th week, 44th production week. So the actual ROM in this one is that one there. At least I think that's the ROM. So you can see there, you can see the code number on that, and then there's a neck chip in there, and then these 2 ones here are the RAM. And you get, so there's not a great deal going on, is there? If you think about it, there's only a few parts. It was originally sold as a kit, so you could buy this. They would all come with old resistors, and you'd poke them through, and you'd solder it yourself. Now this has got a green PCB, because some of them have got a red one. But you can see how it's quite a small circuit board. The keyboard itself on it is just a flat sort of mat which sticks on, and then the ribbon cable pokes through and goes in. So you'll find subtle variations between each one, but the key thing is to look at the ULA, like I just did then, because that's got the actual date. And there are a few websites that have got lists of well, there's one main one. I'll put a link in the description that gives you the lists of the different ULAs that are sort of out there in the wild, and that sort of fits back together like that. You've got the aerial, and you've got the microphone, and you've got the earphone, and you've got the mains input. Thankfully they use the same sockets, but then you could put 9 volts into one of those, and that was never a good idea. So I'm just going to put it back together again. So they're quite easy to take apart and quite easy to put back together again. So you'll find is that when you look at the listings, they will often take the thing apart just to show you inside, so you can see the state of the circuit board and which revision it is. And that will then sort of help you decide whether you want to buy that one or not. Now, they made about 1.5 million of these ZX81s. As I say, 100,000 ZX80s. Most of those got immediately skipped when the 81 came out, or a year later, or they got completely sort of butchered and hacked with the replacement ROMs and changing the keyboards, because you could turn a ZX80 into a ZX81 simply by changing the ROM and then changing the keyboard. So a lot of those 100,000 that were sold were actually modified and changed. So there aren't very many left that are mint, original, untouched. Also, the plastic they used doesn't like sunlight, and they use little plastic rivets. So getting a ZX80 is they're quite rare. 81s, you can pick them up, and this one's got a very nice sort of ZX81 written on it. You can pick up a ZX81 quite nicely. So let's look at games and things now, and how the software was loaded, and we'll do that in the next bit. Right, so let's talk about games and software then. I've got a few here, a few examples here. The elephant in the room, I suppose, is this one, 3D Monster Maze. That is generally considered to be an absolute classic. That was genuinely scary. I know it's hard to believe, but it was genuinely scary at the time. It was also re-released a bit later on. That's the JK Gray version, and that's released again under New Generation. So you can find that some of these are rarer than others. JK Gray is quite good because it released, well, that's what he released, 6 individual tapes where you had 10 games for the 1K Spectrum, Starfighter Pyramid Artist, Catacombs, which was amazing at the time, 3D Monster Maze, absolute classic, 3D Defender, another classic, and Full Screen Breakout for 1K, which was mad. It's full breakout game in 1K. So those are the JK Gray ones. Some of them were re-released. You'll see these on your favourite auction site. 3D Defender was re-released, so that goes with that. This is you might see it with the sticker on fairly regularly. 3D Monster Maze, I've already mentioned, was re-released, so those are re-releases. Sinclair also did their own, as per the catalogue I showed you. So you had cassette 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a cassette 6, which was the quiz one, which has got 4 quiz games on it. So those are the standard. I mean, Lunar Landing, that was, I don't know, I mean, I'm getting enthusiastic about something that you probably don't care about, because at the time it was absolutely ridiculous. This one here, for example, is tape 2. This one's still sealed, still factory sealed. They never used, so can't really test that one. So there's 6 of those. There is a finite number of releases, so in terms of collecting, it is a bit of a nice little hobby to get involved with, because you've got the standard ones like that and the re-releases. So I'm just going to put those in view there so you can see them. There's other ones as well. There's Othello, Brickstop, CDS Microsystems. They did a Castle Adventure. There's a few other ones as well. I did Phoenix. There's 3D Grand Prix. Sinclair did their own branded ones. So you've also got things like 3D Defender, as I mentioned that already, haven't I? But Flight Simulation. There's a Pac-Man game called Zuckman. The absolute classic that is Mazog's. Oh, that was such a good game. There it is, Mazog's. We might load that up on one in a bit. That's an absolute. There's 2 versions of this tape. There's one. There's this particular version which has got the instructions on the inlay. They call it a J, don't they? A J-shaped inlay. Another version which has got the instructions as a separate bit of paper inside. But Mazog's is astonishing, absolutely incredible. You got Space Raiders, Sabotage as well, Espionage Island, backgammon, chess. They also did a range of utility stuff like VUCAC and VUCOL. So there is a finite number of these cassettes. So in terms of collecting, you can pick up, some are worth more than others obviously, and some cost more than others. But if you go on your local favourite online auction site, you can probably pick up a little bundle for not much and have a little play with them. You do, however, need a cassette deck to play them on. So let's look at that next. So we're going to look at cassette decks now. I've got a selection here. Historically, I suppose you've got the really old ones like the Fergusson. I did have one of those, but it's long gone. So you've got this one here, which is a bit more recognisable. This is the W.H. Smith. Well, this particular one is W.H. Smith branded, but it's the CCR 800. So you'll see a lot of these online that aren't W.H. Smith branded, but are this actual particular model, because they're made in People's Republic of Korea, as was then, and a lot of companies just rebranded them. So that's a bit of a common one that you might find, you might come across. There's also this one here. Stand that box up. There's also this one here, which is the Boots branded CR375. So this is actually quite a nice one. They all look very similar, and they all have the same things in common, but they're obviously different products, and you'll get them in different conditions. It's unusual to get them with the instruction book, but there's the instruction book for it, and this was date of purchase 1984. So this actually, the ZX81 had been out 3 years when this was actually released. So you're probably not going to get an original one from the 80s because it's probably been destroyed, but that's quite a nice one. So these are all fairly classic things, and I said they've got things in common, and the main thing in common is that they're mono, so they're not stereo. Then you get ones like this, which is the Sony TCM 818. That's a little bit more clunkier, but this is, we're now talking sort of Sinclair ZX Spectrum sort of age now, so that's that one there. And I've actually got a TCM 919 in its original box with all its instructions and everything else. So that's all in there. Look, all the bits of paper and things are in there, and it's all got the original stuff. So what's interesting about this one is that all these ones here, they would use your standard cable, which looks basically like that sort of figure 8 infinity sort of cable with a fuse plug on the end of it. So they would use that, but the Sony ones would have their own mains adapter, so they would have their own external mains adapter. What we should do now is see one in action. So let's load a game on the ZX81 and see what happens. So let's try loading a game. This is a cassette deck I'm using is a W.H. Smith branded CCR 800, which is a mono cassette deck, because you will need a mono one. I'm going to power up the ZX81 like that. I'll wait for the little K to appear. So we've got the K. This is flight simulation, so I'm going to take the cassette out of its case, pop it into the player. I'm going to just press the J key to bring up load, Shift P to give the quotes, and I'm going to start the player going. I'm going to press function new line, and you can see the little wavy lines on the screen. It's a bit off-putting. I've started the stopwatch as well, so we'll see how long it takes. We'll put that there, and stand that up, I think, get a better view, like that. Can we see that? Yeah, we can see that. So stopwatch is going, the game is loading. It's quite off-putting because the screen goes completely blank while it's loading, so you don't know if it's going to work until it's finished. So fingers crossed it'll work. Right, so that's actually doing its load check. You can see there, CLC load check passed. And here is, that was exactly 6 minutes. Yeah, so that was flight simulation. 6 minutes exactly. Do you want the final approach, yes or no? So you can fly and then land, or just go straight for landing. So let's try straight for landing. So I'm going to press Y for landing. I don't want wind effects. Yes. Let's have a bit of wind effects, just a bit of fun. So that was the tape clicking, by the way. So yes for wind effects. Wind speed is 3 knots from 60 degrees. Press any key except brake. Any key except brake. So that's, I'll just press that one. And right, we're flying. Ooh. Okay, I don't know what the keys are. Oh, look, there we go. That's I'm banking. My gear's up. I can't really see where I'm going though. Let's go down. I'm 700 feet at the moment. So that's the flight simulator. I'll just move this camera a little bit so you get a better view. That's the flight simulator. I'm just going to move the computer. Oh, I crashed. Whoops. Crash report. You crashed into the ground at speed of 94 knots. Enter run to fly again. So it's if I press run, it's having a little think about things. What's it doing? I press run. And there we go. We'll fly again. So press Y for yes. Final approach. Wind effects. No this time. No wind effects. And we're off again. Right, 800 feet, 150 knots. Let's go upwards. So the SD1 didn't actually have any graphics as such. It had sort of block characters. You can see they were quite inventive with what you could do with that. So that's flight simulation. 6 minutes to load. Yeah, so on to the next bit of the video. Right, so here's some just sort of some closing thoughts. So you get this. I think this came from Reader's Digest, judging by the size of it. So they were £70 when they were first released, plus £2.95 packing, and you could obviously buy the mail order. You could buy them as kits. Kits are very rare, but they exist. They'll cost you about £400 or £500 if it's in good condition. There's also other peripherals as well, because you've got your standard RAM pack, the Sinclair branded one, but that was notorious for wobbling and crashing. So there are other things to consider as well. For example, there's this, which is the memo pack from Memotech. This one's actually in extremely good condition, considering its age. So you've got the instruction manual included with it as well. So there's the little manual. So there's all sorts of little test programs that you type in to see if it works, and just various questions and a guarantee. And that's it. That's it there. There's actually a bit of, it's metal, so it's quite a substantial case rather than this sort of plastic thing. There's a bit of Velcro still left on that one, because you would attach Velcro to the back and then it would just sort of connect on like that. And that doesn't wobble, so that's actually it's a more refined solution to the thing that Sinclair came up with, and it's generally a whole lot better. And it's also got a pass through as well, so you could add other stuff. There are some fairly weird and wonderful little things that you can get for the ZX81, little contraptions and things. That was advertised on this advert here from Everyday Electronics, June 1982, page 423. And they did a whole range of different peripherals for it. You've got the Centronics interface, high-res graphics, and the memo pack. Everything's sort of plugged in, everything connected. There's a whole load of stuff going on with that. So there were other sort of peripherals at the time when you could get a soldering iron for £6. Wow. Another thing to mention is that the actual computer itself, I'll just move all that out of the way because this is an important bit, and I'll connect it up. And there's something that's quite important to mention, especially if you've got a modern telly. So I'll just plug it all in like this, and I'll power this up, and you can see on the screen when I do that, there's the screen. You see it's quite fuzzy, and if I sort of just twiddle it, you can see it's got sort of a lot depends on what your TV is, because if you've got RF input on your TV, it's going to be a bit fuzzy anyway. This one's actually quite good. This is a Sony. Once the game sort of works and things are loaded up, it's actually quite good. But what you can do is get one of these little things here, which is a little circuit board. Because it outputs RF, you can get one of these for about, I think they're about £12 or £10 or something off sort of your local auction site, and it comes with all the bits and bobs that you need to replace the RF that's actually inside it, and you put that in, solder that in instead, and then you get composite, which would go onto that connector there. And most modern TVs have got a composite input, so if you're okay modifying it and getting a soldering iron out, then obviously fitting a composite mod is going to make your life a lot easier if your TV has got a bit of a dodgy sort of RF, because they ditched RF a long time ago, so you might not even have RF on it. This older Sony does, and with some ZX81s the picture's quite good, and with others it's a bit fuzzy, because you do get quite a variety of outputs from that RF. There are some quite peculiar signals that come out. So what you might find is on eBay, if you want, you'll get one that's got the composite mod pre-fitted, and then that will work, and you can actually sort of play with it. So there's two sorts of things to this. There's sort of the collecting aspect of it, where you sort of buy it and sort of preserve it. That's one thing. Another thing is actually buying it to use, and if you're buying it to use, then having one with the composite mod on is a good idea. It's also the tip of the iceberg, because there's a whole load of stuff that you can do. Rather than wait 6 minutes for a game to load, you can get different sort of readers and SD card loaders, and there's a whole thriving sort of aftermarket. So it's aftermarket now because it's 40 years old, but sort of an aftermarket in modifications for these sort of things. You can get full-size keyboards. You can get So if you go on your favourite online auction site and just sort of search for it, hopefully that'll give you a bit of an idea of what you're going to get for your money. And in terms of cost, well, that local online auction site is problematic, because you just need two people that really want what the listing is, and then like a bidding fight will occur. So you can pick up these sort of modding things, RF things, for about 10 quid, but the actual ZX81, well, that will depend on whether it's boxed, whether it's complete, whether it's got a nice box, whether it works, whether it's got the RAM pack with it, whether it's got accessories with it, whether it's got games with it. A lot of these things are now loft finds, because here's the rather grim bit of what this video is about. When you have, if you're about 13 like I was when I had one, what will tend to happen is that you'll tend to sell it to fund the next thing that you're interested in, which is, I think, what I did. Obviously, no point regretting it because it's done. If you were in your sort of 30s when you got it, because it was like the next big thing, and you wanted to, it was just kind of fun to play with, and you wanted to, because it was these are talking about the first sort of computers that you can take home with you that aren't going to cost, that are going to be affordable. Then there's a good chance that you kept it and shoved it in your loft. And if you were like 30 in like 1980, 40 years ago, well, that's going to put you in your sort of 70s. And if you're a bit old, maybe your 80s. So there's a lot of these that are coming to light because of lofts being emptied, because you're downsizing, or worse than that. Because there are quite a few things that are worse than downsizing. So there are quite a few of these things that are being found in lofts and just listed on eBay. And what you'll find is that the ZX80s are going to be rare because of what I've already discussed, but the ZX81s, they sold 1.5 million of them. So there are a lot of them probably still in lofts. A lot of them obviously ended up, in landfill and whatever, but there are a lot of lofts that have got these things in. So you might get lucky and pick yourself one up for on the cheap. Mint ones, hundreds. Basic ones, like, you know, without the box, without the polystyrene, maybe 20, 30 quid. So I haven't sought to answer every single question about this. It's not an exhaustive video. It's just, hopefully, if you next time I ask when I'm doing the course and you stare at me blankly, not knowing what a ZX81 is, I'll send you to this video to have a look at, and hopefully that'll, you know, have some questions on it. It might arouse a bit of interest. Obviously, if you do have questions, then stick them in the comments, and I will endeavour to answer them. I tend to answer all the questions. But as I say, it wasn't meant to be exhaustive. It was just meant to be sort of interesting. I did sort of, it wasn't scripted, so I might have rambled a little bit. But if you do have any questions about it and you are interested in this kind of retro hardware, then I can, there's some links in the description of where to go to talk to people that make me look normal. And I mean that in the most affectionate way possible. So yeah, liking and subscribing is appreciated. And thanks for watching.